Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Hamre, the president here at CSIS. And it's a real privilege today because this is a seminar, it's an inaugural seminar that we're launching thanks to Dr. Dario Gil, who has become the latest member of the Board of Trustees at CSIS. And he offered to help us with something that we felt was important, and we thought having a seminar dialogue that brings to the policy world some insights about what technology is over the horizon and what do we need to do to anticipate it is something that we should be doing for the nation. And so this is the start of what I think is going to be a very important session. We wanted to start in a very broad way. We wanted to start by just setting the stage in a with a large canvas. And that is, why is science and technology important for America? Why should it be a national priority? And to deal with that, we've brought in a remarkable individual to be a colleague today to Dario Gil, and that's for you, Sudip Parikh. Thank you for joining us. You're legendary in Washington science policy circles. He's the CEO of the American American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, the executive publisher of Science magazine, and he's also a member of the executive of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has a very long history in Washington in science policy circles. And so it's a perfect way to launch this conversation. Why is science and technology important for America? And so as a way to start on this, I wanted to pick up on a study that the two of you were involved with. You were the co-chair, I think, of this organization. It's called the Science and Technology Action Committee, and you've recently produced something called The State of Science in America. As one of the co-chairs, you probably should be the start here, Sudip. So why did you do this study? Why was it important for you to do this study?
John, thanks again for inviting me to do this. The reason we did this study is we felt that we were in a moment of opportunity. It was 2019 when we pulled the Science and Technology Action Committee together, and we thought that there was a moment where we could show the country that science and technology are important to building the foundation of the country, building the foundation of our economy, building the foundation of health, building the foundation of national security. And so we brought together 25 individuals who were in industry, who were in academia, who were in government, and we wanted to make the case for science in America. And we came up with three recommendations. Fast forward to this year, and what we saw is that we needed to show where we were as a country in science and technology. Are we in a good place? Are we in a bad place? Are there opportunities? Are there challenges? And really make that known to the country. And part of it was as a reflection of what we think of ourselves. We needed to know what do the workers of America, what do the people of America see in themselves in terms of science and technology. We felt that was important, in addition to how scientists feel about science. Scientists have one narrow view, but what do people in healthcare, what do people in defense, what do people in other businesses think of science and technology?
So, Dario, you've got 1,000 things to do in addition to, running a research program at IBM. Why did you decide you wanted to be a part of this?
Well, I mean, personally, I have been very interested and committed to science and technology policy, so I was intrinsically interested. But more importantly, I thought it was necessary that we had representation across the different sectors, right? And when we talk about science policy, historically, we have seen, obviously, university presidents and administrators and faculty members advocating for the importance of research and science policy. But you didn't often see leaders in the private sector, right? Or, in the context also of today's discussion of the national security community and establishment, and how do we actually advocate for something that has derived so many profound benefits to the American economy and American citizens. So it was driven also by this sense of responsibility, and it was a pleasure to be able to collaborate across leaders from different sectors, university presidents, leaders in business, and nonprofits as well coming together. And unless we coalesce and come together and bring the urgency of why we need to invest much more aggressively in science and technology, and how it derives a foundation for economic and national security, prosperity, that we weren't going to get there. So that's what motivated me and the institution I represent in this context, IBM.
Well, this report it's really interesting, and by the way, we'll provide a link for it in the website that'll accompany this recording. But this isn't just 25 scientists sitting around blue sky in it. You based it on surveys. You conducted, I think, over 2,000 people that you surveyed, and you were surveying in 5 different sectors of the economy: K through 12 education, healthcare, business, science, technology, and engineering and math, so the STEM community, and then the national security community. And so you looked, if 2,000 people are making comments about this, and then you're reflecting on the results of this. So in boldface type, the first conclusion of this study is, and I quote, "The United States is perceived to be losing the race for global leadership in science and technology." Really? I mean, is that really the case? Is that just a perception? Are we losing that race?
Let me start with just saying where we are in this moment. And as a person who talks about science all day long, I talk about every field of science. We are in an extraordinary moment in terms of science. We are on the threshold of so many advances. We've already made so many advances, and you see them in how much we know about the universe, how much we know about this planet, and how much we know about ourselves. And you see it in quantum computing. You see it in AI. You see it in gene editing. We are on the threshold of cures for disease. We're on the threshold of computing, the likes of which we've never seen before. And yet, the perception that is in this poll is really telling. Because what it is the sense of the American people that are we seeing lagging indicators? Are those successes lagging indicators of previous investment? And what are our policies today? And so when someone who's in the healthcare field or in education says, yes, I see quantum computing happening, I see AI happening, I see gene editing happening, that's wonderful, but I recognize that the seeds of that prosperity that were laid 20 years ago are not being laid today. We are not investing as much as we did as a percentage of GDP. We are not investing as much as competitive nations around the world in terms of trend line. We are not doing the talent recruitment that we need to do across our 340 million people. We're not serving as a beacon to immigrants who want to do science in our country. And so when you wrap all those things together, the instinct, the perception of folks in education, in healthcare, in national security is actually very, very close to the data that we see. And so I think it's actually remarkable that the American people sense this even before our politicians do.
Even, just to be quantitative of some of the metrics that I think perhaps are, even being recognized as an intuition, is the story also of the rest of the world is a story of convergence. In the United States, obviously, there was a benefit of the science and technology ecosystem that was built after the Second World War with the establishment of the National Science Foundation and later other agencies like NASA and the laboratory ecosystem of the Department of Energy and beyond, and NIH, et cetera. And what we've seen is, over the course of many decades, a process of emulating and creating their own set of institutions across the world. So some numbers to be on the table. The United States continues to be the global leader from absolute dollar spend. The science and engineering enterprise in the United States is about $800 billion a year. If you look at now China, which is the second level of performer in terms of total R&D spend, I think it's close to $700 billion. But you're seeing this trend of convergence. And for example, if you look at the science engineering indicators that the National Science Board recently produced, you see examples like in total number of patents produced, China now has surpassed the United States just a few years ago. It just began that trend. Total number of publications, China has surpassed the United States. Total number of PhD graduates in science and engineering has surpassed the United States. So this element of this convergence and this trend. And while, for example, in the United States, we have seen that the aggregate spend on R&D has greatly increased, so getting to this $800 billion, $600 billion of that is now spent by the private sector. So now, of that growth over the last decade, 87% is accounted by the private sector spend and increases in R&D. So what we're seeing is that federal levels of support for science and technology have very, very modestly increased. And that worries us because that is the core fuel that enables this whole ecosystem to be successful.
Yeah, I would like to come to that in a minute. Let me just ask, but one of the things your poll showed was that there was pretty much equal support between Republicans and Democrats on the need for this, and yet, okay, anything bipartisan in this town, usually something happens, but nothing's happening. Why?
It's a case of 535 people liking it, but no one loving it. So on the National Institutes of Health, we've been fortunate to have champions in the political arena, in the Appropriations Committee and elsewhere, who have said, I'm going to make this the priority when we get to the omnibus, when we get to the final stages of the appropriations process. For the rest of science, for National Science Foundation, for the Department of Energy, for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, there hasn't been that champion at the last minute, the minute when it really matters in the appropriation cycle that we all know about here in Washington. And so when everybody likes it, but nobody loves it to that degree, you get malevolent neglect. You get the neglect of, gosh, nobody's going to yell if the funding for the National Science Foundation is cut, but they will yell if funding is cut for the Department of Commerce in this area, in this other area. And that is the tragedy. That is a tragedy, because what we have here is a space where the National Science Foundation at $9 billion to $10 billion to $11 billion a year is the basis, the heat that provides so much innovation and economic foundation in this country. And we don't have the folks at the end of the day in the room on appropriations and on the negotiation side in leadership to say it must be a priority. We've got to change that.
I mean, let me give you an example. In touching the National Science Foundation, it supports 70% of federally supported work in R&D in mathematics and computer science. But take the latter one, take computer science, right? I think we will be hard pressed to find a business or an institution in the United States that would not say that that is absolutely essential, right, to present and future competitiveness. And yet, when it comes to the very foundation that actually supports, educates, trains, and pushes the research around that, it's actually one of the first things in the chopping block. And so this is the problem. And what we have to, and why this conversation is so important, this matters is a national security matter. It is literally the basis of the competitive and national security advantage of the United States. Take mathematics. We rely on cryptography, we rely on encryption, we rely on a whole variety of things for signals intelligence, and you go on beyond. We need to be able to train, invest, and push the limits of what we can do in these disciplines.
I would define national security even bigger than that, because it's the vitality of your economy.
It's the direct and the indirect, right? It's not just the innovations for national security itself, but it's the economic strength that provides that opportunity for national security. You have to be able to have the economy to support a national security structure.
Well, just to illustrate the point you just mentioned, when 2 years ago we had the famous CHIPS Act, this was to bring semiconductor manufacturing back to America, and it was, at the time that it was passed, it was something like $250 billion, but only $50 billion was appropriated.
That's right. It's only 53.
It was just the $53 billion for the chips.
That's right.
Manufacturing. Right. Now that happened because 5 governors called in to the Senate, to their various senators, and said, "Don't go home on the August recess until you pass it." Now we didn't have governors calling in to pass the $200 billion that's needed for boosting the foundation of science in America. How do we get support at that level?
Yeah, we've got to draw the connection. We've got to make that connection as clear as it can possibly be. And sometimes it's lost because of the success. The success is that we have the success of creating mathematicians and computer programmers and biologists who then go into academia or go into industry. But at the end of the day, when the product is created, we don't make the tie back directly to the funding that created it, the heat. And it's not because we want the government to own that technology, that intellectual property. It's because we want to show that that is the catalyst. That funding, that investment, that innovation that happens at the National Science Foundation and elsewhere is what initiated the path towards that product that then becomes part of our economic vitality and then part of our everyday lives, whether it's our cell phones or whether it's the technology to talk anywhere in the world through satellite phones. All that had its start in the Department of Defense in basic research, in NSF in basic research, and in the DOE in basic research.
I completely agree. I think that aspect of bringing back attribution and celebrating how past investments, of the citizens of our country expressed through these agencies and then permeating through the science and engineering enterprise deliver results that pay off over different horizons and decades. But the investment and the returns are extraordinary. But sometimes you're right. Like people lost is like, well, did that come out of nowhere?
Right.
The invention is like, no. That happened because we invested in the past and we are reaping the rewards right now that get expressed in commercial success, in employment, and in economic vitality. Right?
Well, just look at how much of our economy benefits and depends on GPS.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just so ubiquitous. I mean, we experience it because the pizza driver knows exactly where to go to deliver my pizza. But, the Department of Defense spent $34 billion putting that infrastructure in space. But it's a benefit that's infinitely larger for the rest of the economy.
That's right. I mean, GPS, the internet, you name it.
Yeah.
And currently today, by the way, about 24% of the workforce in the United States is STEM related. Both, qualified technical workforce that don't have 4 college degrees and 4-year college degrees and beyond. So it already reflects a massive, percentage of the employment in the United States and growing. Because also when we look forward over the next decade of the demand of employment in all of these fields, in semiconductors and in artificial intelligence and many other areas, we see sort of like demand as far as the eye can see. So that is also not only present, but future demand, right?
Okay, 24% of an employment base ought to be political leverage. How do we mobilize them? How do we get them focused?
One of the things we have to do is make sure they know.
Yeah.
Right. So if you are in a profession that that requires a technical degree and you are supporting the sciences, we need to make sure that you see that connection. And we haven't done a good job of that. And so that's part of the work of STAC is to put out a report like this so that we can say, and then make sure we advertise around it to let people know that this is the connection. If we start to make that connection, we start to build political will, and we make it to where the public recognizes when there's a cut to the National Science Foundation. That should hurt. If there's a cut at the National Institutes of Health, patients see it, they make noise about it because they recognize that when you cut those grants, you're cutting the opportunity for discovery, which is lengthening the time to treatment. You're lengthening the time to treatment. When we cut things at the National Science Foundation, when we cut things at the Department of Energy, we're not just lengthening times to treatment and diagnostics. We are hurting our future national security. We're hurting our future vitality as an economic power. And you don't get that back. Once you lose it, you don't get it back because it is a wonderful virtuous cycle on the upswing, and it's also a devastating downward cycle once you're not in first place anymore.
Yeah.
By the way, there's also strong technical trend reasons of why it is important to care so much about the diversity of agencies that support federal work. And it is the following. Future advances in the National Institute of Health are going to depend on advances that are happening in artificial intelligence, to give you an example. But again, the major funder of advances in those areas are actually not inside the National Institute of Health.
That's right.
So we depend on each other in science and technology for progress in the field. So our ability, for example, to increase the rate of diagnosis or discover new biomarkers and biomolecules today is done very differently than it was done in the past. And the role of computation and simulation and the role of generative AI as an example in the context of this new world is really transforming in profound ways how health is going to be practiced and advances in discovery. So we need to make this causal connection that actually, yes, we want to grow these National Institute of Health, but actually we have to grow these other areas even for this piece, even if you said, I only care about health, let's say as an argument. Actually investing in here will reap great dividends over here.
It's again why I think CSIS, traditionally a national security think tank, believes this should be the premier initiative and agenda for us right now. Let me turn to, this is a report that you referred me to over the weekend. I read it. Dr. Gil sent me, this was a recent report called Science and Engineering Indicators. It's a report required by law to be produced by the National Science Board, and is prepared by the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics within the NSF. I'm going to read a series of things just to give the audience a feel for it, but I'm going to ask you guys to react on it. These are all direct quotes. National assessments show a sharp decline in elementary and secondary student mathematics performance since COVID-19 pandemic. Enrollment of international science and engineering graduate students at the United States has rapidly increased from approximately 200,000 in 2020 to nearly 310,000 in 22. Foreign-born individuals make up 19% of all STEM workers and 43% of doctorate-level scientists and engineers. Women are underrepresented in the STEM workforce, and they account for 35% of all STEM workers in 2021. You also go on to note, the report goes on to note, that people of color are severely underrepresented in the science field. R&D funding by the federal government decreased from 30% in 2010 to 19% in 2021. Like K through 12 education outcomes, innovation capabilities, and STEM labor force are not uniform across the country. The report notes that there are workers that there are hotspots on the two coasts and along the Great Lakes, but there's a crying need to broaden the base of innovation in this. So you sent me the report, so let me ask, give our audience an overview of what's the message here that we're saying to the public? I mean, it looks like pretty broad-based deterioration.
Well, the message is like talent, talent, talent. Mm-hmm. In the end, the success of all of these endeavors relied on having the best talent in the world focus on STEM. And what it shows is areas where we have to pay the most attention. So the pandemic had a massive impact. So the first quote that you were referring to, if you look at the performance in K through 12, in this case, 4th graders and 8th graders, and on mathematics performance, we have gone back 20 years. So we have regressed in performance by 20 years as a consequence of the pandemic. You're also seeing that we're not educating enough of the domestic workforce in advanced degrees, as an example. And that while we have been blessed, and I'm an example of that, of being able to bring talent from around the world, we have an extraordinary dependency in the success of the enterprise in keeping that going. And if you look at in particular fields, you mentioned roughly half of PhDs, as an example, are foreign-born. If you look at areas like computer science and engineering, that percentage is even higher. And the highest dependency actually we have in that, in an absolute number of countries, is actually coming from China, as an example around that, which is a blessing in some ways, but we're having a huge amount of dependency around that. So, and also for equity reasons, in terms of distributing the benefits of STEM and the opportunity in STEM and all the talent that we have in the country, both in the diversity of backgrounds and in the geography of it, we have to do much better. So that's the core message, is actually to look that there's a number of things, despite some of the great strengths we have in the country in STEM, but we see this issue of talent as alarming, and we need a core investment back. And in fact, in STAC, one of the huge concerns that were raised in the survey was K through 12 STEM education as perhaps the number one issue that we should be most worried about.
Yeah, you know what you're seeing is a confluence of this report and the STAC report saying the same things. The lights are flashing red. Yeah. We are in a great place because of things we did 20 years ago. We've got to continue, and we've actually got to innovate even further. We have to make sure that we are drawing on talent. If we're going to, when the mRNA vaccine came out, Anthony Fauci wrote a piece where he thanked the scientists who were involved. I went back and I looked at each of those people, and I just very quickly did a note of where did they come from? What's their backgrounds? And there was a tremendous diversity of background, of ethnicity, of gender, of immigration. Incredible. And it shows you the power of the diversity of thought and backgrounds going to be necessary to solve big, challenging problems. And we have big, challenging, existential problems that we have to overcome. And every team that I see, whether it's running a helicopter on Mars, building supercomputers, building quantum computers, every team is diverse.
Think how we're cheating ourselves as a country by having only 35% of women in the STEM force. We're cheating ourselves of the talent of
Absolutely.
the people of color.
Absolutely.
These are talented people. We're not getting the best out of that opportunity. We're cheating ourselves, and we should be looking at it as it's like sitting on a gold mine, and we don't want to dig. We should try to figure out how to dig. Let me just ask. You've raised this issue of immigration, very controversial topic. And yet, when I look at who are the leaders of Fortune 500s, if I look at especially the IT industry right now, I mean, Indian Americans are dominant, and this is just really spectacular. It's from immigrants, and yet we have a paranoia about this now. Can you just share your thoughts about, especially paranoia about China?
Yeah. Let me just step back and first say this is an extraordinary country. Any country where immigrants have been welcomed in the way they have been over the past 75 years is extraordinary. I'm a product of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Without it, I don't exist. So we should look at that and just celebrate the fact that we have achieved so much. The thing to be careful of is that we tend to go through these pendulum swings in our nation, where we welcome immigrants and then where we say they're the cause of our challenges and our problems. And the paranoia that surrounds China, for example, is there are seeds to that. There are some things that have happened that are absolutely true, and we have to be on guard about that. But we also have to recognize that so many people are drawn to this country for the same reason that the Irish were drawn, that the Italians were drawn, that people came to Ellis Island, which is that there's opportunity and that there's creative freedom. Whenever you want to do great science, it requires the freedom to be creative and to be against the grain, to have an argument. And that ecosystem, that capacity, that culture is here in the United States in a way that almost doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, or hasn't for a long time. Now, people are trying to recreate it because they see the success. And so we have to make sure that we're not sacrificing it ourselves. And so things like the China Initiative, which really, in many ways went too far. Knocked on doors of scientists who have been here for a very long time, citizens of the country, and looked at mundane paperwork mistakes as egregious legal challenges. There are absolutely some bad actors, and we have to make sure that we are careful in vetting and all the things that are required. But we can't throw out the thing that has made us incredibly successful because we are scared. Fear is our enemy there.
And I think also in a huge segment of what we produce in like basic research and so on, the characteristic of science is that it has been open. And how is that? Well, it is done because it is taught, fundamentally in the open. Publications are made widely available. Even the patenting process, makes things widely available. And there's a feedback mechanism on what gets published that gets, reviewed, validated, and so on from scientists around the world. So it's actually a fundamental characteristic of many of the advances of the scientific method that has relied on an open collaborative ecosystem with scientists around the world. So that can be true while simultaneously understanding that there are elements of the technology stack that we may want to be extremely protective of. So very often we end up in this situation of open versus closed, or should we do this or not do that? And I know maybe it's not like a popular thing to say, but it's like the question is, it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do. So for example, even in the context of an enterprise and a company like IBM, when you formulate a technology strategy, you say, what's open? And how do you collaborate on that? What is proprietary, right? That you want to defend as a basis of a competitive advantage. And it's never the case, even in the most sensitive technologies, like quantum as an example, that you say, the entire stack is proprietary. Just simply untrue. There will be elements throughout that whole stack that is entirely appropriate to do in a completely open fashion, and including collaboration, right, with scientists that are coming from China and from countries all over the world. That makes us better. It actually makes the science better. It allows us to make progress better. And it is not incompatible to say, you know what, this other thing, no, we're going to keep it in a separate stack.
You know, about 20 years ago, I chaired a national commission for the Department of Energy on science and security in the national labs. And, you know, I come from a security background. I got cop's blood in my veins, you know. I mean, I'm traditionally, you know, my people don't really, they're not science people or not creative people. And we're a little worried about things. Well, there's no way I can understand what's important that goes on in a laboratory unless a scientist tells me, you know, is this important? Is this not important? Is this sensitive? Is it not sensitive? This seems to me to depend on an authentic dialogue between security and scientists.
That's right.
Where scientists share very openly, and they, you know, a lot of scientists are afraid to go talk to the cops because, well, Jesus, they don't understand, and they'll just make it harder, and we'll just don't tell them, you know. And there are a lot of cops that just are suspicious because they don't, you know, they got a lot of foreigners there in that organization. What are we doing there? We have to find a way to create more of an authentic partnership between the security community and the science community. How do we do that?
You know, I'm a one-trick pony when it comes to this. You just have to spend time together. You actually have to spend time together and be authentic in a dialogue. And that means, you know, what we've done with politicians is we've said, okay, we're going to have scientists spend time in Congress. We're going to have scientists spend time in the judiciary. We're going to have scientists spend time in the media. It'd be terrific to have scientists who understand the law enforcement community and folks in the law enforcement community who understand science. We need to be able to build those bridges. All that said, it is critically important that whatever we implement over time doesn't become so overbearing that it takes up the time. You know, a scientist should be doing science and not filling out paperwork. And so we've got to make sure that we create the efficiencies to do the vetting that we need to do, to make sure that we are being protective of the right elements of the stack, but also allow our scientists to do the work they need to do.
Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to ask harder questions about who is a foreign collaborator in an experiment than the police will. Because you know you don't want them to screw up your experiment, you don't want them to pollute your data. You know, you're going to ask harder questions than we will.
I agree, but also we just have to all be part of this dialogue. Is get a little bit more sophisticated, and not just, you know, get stuck in the category. Is like, oh my goodness, are you working on artificial intelligence or quantum computers, and there are foreigners involved? And it's like that's like saying, are you doing mathematics and there's foreigners involved? It's like, you know, look, if there are big fields, it depends. The answer again is it depends. There's many other things, many areas within that are like not only not problematic. It's actually wonderful that we get to be able to do that together. Then there could be other elements around that's like actually that we want to really protect. Like, you know, our life depends on it, and we need each other's help to make sure that that is protected and that we really safeguard it. So it is this element of putting things in the right categories, in the right buckets, and having somewhat dispassionate sort of conversation that is very fact-based, grounded, and taking the knowledge and expertise of both sides of the table that you are saying legitimately, right? And you say, we all agree that we want to safeguard and protect the most sensitive technology. Actually, there's no debate. Like in general, like on the people I interact with, like there's no strong debate about that. We agree with that. I think the question is, how do we do that? And how do we collaborate to get to that outcome?
Yeah, I don't know, Sudip, if you do this, maybe you already do, but it would be really powerful if you could have, you know, security guys come in and spend a day with saying, how do you run research projects, collaborative research projects? What is the kind of work that you do to ensure that you have a viable partner in another country, and how do you keep track of each other's work? I mean, I think the science people can help. You're going to have to help the security guys understand more.
John, we haven't done that before. You know, we've done it, again, like I said, in the world of politics, in the world of judiciary, in the world of media. We have not, and also in the faith community we've done it. And so if we can have those conversations in the faith community, if we can have those conversations in media, I don't see why we can't have those
I think it'd be a great idea. Okay, let me shift. You know, you can't have a conversation about science and public policy without having two topics come up, China and artificial intelligence. So let's start with, I don't know, the easy one. Let's start with artificial intelligence. I spoke recently with a friend of mine who's a dean of a major school. And I said, how is your faculty thinking about artificial intelligence? And he said, well, the scientists are really curious about it. The engineers are really excited about it. And the humanities faculty think it's the end of the world. You know, is that kind of how you guys are experiencing the way the world is looking at AI?
In the academic sciences, there's a lot of excitement. We've seen problems that we thought weren't going to be solved in our lifetimes get solved. When I was in graduate school, we wondered how to fold a protein, and I'm not going to go into why that is, but we really wondered, how do you fold a protein in nature? And we developed all kinds of models that took into account every bit of physics. And then it turns out that you can solve it with artificial intelligence without actually looking at the physics, but rather looking at patterns. And that is remarkable. That is absolutely remarkable. And we're seeing that over and over and over again in fields like material science, in biology, in physics. And so there's so much more to come. And it's not all related to generative AI and LLMs. It's related to machine learning and all kinds of different parts of AI. But we are, on the cusp of remarkable advances. And so when I see that, and the only thing I worry about is that I don't want to see those advances that we've built the foundations for to anywhere else. I want to see the fruits of that here in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Look, what is going on in the field right now is quite profound. I mean, just to recap, the field itself has been around for a long time, right? Since 1956 when it was going. It has famously gone through many cycles of boom and bust, right? What in the field is called AI winters and so on. But since 2012, and most recently with the advent of a new generation of technology that allows for self-supervision, meaning that you don't have to label so many examples. At the core of a lot of advances in AI is this idea that is very data-driven, and you train a machine to learn and now to generate by giving it examples. The issue we had is that all those examples that we were giving, whether they were images or recognize radiology or in a satellite be able to recognize images, you had to label them. Somebody had to go and say, this is that, and so on. And that was very expensive. And so it limited the number of institutions that could participate. The recent advent around self-supervision in AI means that actually you can take that raw data that you have and use very clever techniques that allows you to actually learn about the data and generate predictions or generate new things without having to label so many examples. The consequence of that has been transformative because you have lowered now the cost on exploring 1,000, 10,000 use cases. So what is happening is really powerful tools are being made available now that everybody, like in every discipline, are saying, oh, I can use it for this, I can use it for that, I can use it for this. So that aspect of democratization and creativity of it is what's driving this incredible explosion. So it is profound, the idea that we can learn from data and that we can have these representations of knowledge that are very different than how we have done things in the past.
And do you feel that we adequately understand the potential embedded biases inside these packages? You get these stories about, give me a picture of a doctor, and it's always a white guy. What about embedded biases in AI?
Sure. They're present because, just to give an example, let's say you're in the banking sector and you want to use AI to help you do credit scoring, right? Who should get a loan and who doesn't? If you naively take historical data and you go to banks, right, in the United States,
you get redlining.
Hey, who did you give loans to? Let me learn from historical data and build a model that allows to predict. Is going to give you literally illegal recommendations, right? Because it is going to show it's discriminating on the basis of race and gender. Yep. Now, you would say, well, is the AI, in this case, racist and sexist? It's like, no, the data. The reflection of who we were as a society and institution is reflected in the data. So that's not a good way to implement it. You actually have to take elements of data in the past, but you have to do a lot of extra work to understand the quality of the data that you're using to train, the quality of the method that you use to learn the model, and the after-the-fact verification to make sure you're compliant with the law and that you're following all the right ethical guidelines that you're supposed to do. Now, this is not insurmountable. We do this all the time, right? In IBM, in other companies, and other institutions, which means is you take accountability for the end-to-end system. AI is no magical thing. It's a piece of software. that humans create, and you are accountable to make sure that you are compliant not only with the law, but actually deeper and more profound standards that you have to do. So that is what trusted and responsible AI is. But it's not some kind of mythical, philosophical discussion. It's engineering. You can implement it with data processes and model processes to get to good outcomes.
Well, everybody's talking about trusted and reliable AI. Is that something that can be legislated?
That's right. So look, I think there is no doubt that there needs to be a regulatory framework for AI. But having said that, the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that there's already many regulatory bodies that already have in their books the scope with which to regulate AI applied to healthcare or transportation or nuclear, applied to, nuclear secrets and other things. So you have many other things that you can apply already. There will be gaps of things that perhaps we don't have the right regulatory framework for AI. An example could be identity. There is a lot of issues we've seen with deepfakes around that, or being able to clone your voice or your image and so on. So there will have to be important things that gets addressed by law and regulation that actually protects certain things that are now possible that we did not anticipate in the past. But at the same time, let's not, go to the limit and get to the point where, as I joke sometimes, you're regulating mathematics, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes we've gotten recently dangerously close to that, where we go and we say, this is the size of the neural network that you can use, and that would be like in the past saying, don't use more than 1,000 integrals, or, and so on in your software. Yeah. And you're getting to a point where it's very problematic.
Mm-hmm. One key to that, though, is actually having the workforce in the regulatory agencies, in Congress, in industry, in academia, that can actually, in each of those fields, start making those recommendations and those guidelines. And that requires a whole revamping of our workforce. There aren't the people inside the banking regulatory bodies and inside the financial institutions yet who can do that. And so we've got to build that workforce.
That's very, very important insight, because we've lost the back and forth between the government employee base and the private sector employee base. We just don't see people moving back and forth anymore. And so we have, government employees. They're well-meaning, they're hardworking, they're very loyal, very dedicated, but they don't have a background. And we don't know how to educate them to have that background. It's an important insight that we have to develop. Let me ask, if I may, what do you think about the European Union's approach on regulating AI?
So I'll say a couple of things. So first of all, the overall framework of regulating AI based on risk is the right approach. And what that means is that, obviously, let's say you're going to use AI in the context of healthcare. It's very different than you're going to use AI to do pizza recommendation system. Mm-hmm. So a use case and risk-adjusted approach to regulating AI is the right way to go about it. And not go down to regulating the core of the technology, sort of like fundamentally around that, and these neural networks and what is happening around that, and to not go down the road, like some people have proposed even here in the United States, to a licensing regime, where basically the government has to grant licenses as to who can develop AI, which would be, in my view, a terrible disaster if that happens. So I actually think that the EU, on the AI Act, has gotten it, roughly right in that direction of focusing on risk. I think in general, in the EU, the risk that they sometimes have is that the basis of competitive advantage is not the regulatory framework. And sometimes in Europe, and I say it as somebody, who grew up there, they can get to the point where they think that is the basis of competitive advantage, and they're missing the other side, which is like the innovation capacity, the ability to really push and creative spirit around that. And there's been a lot of tensions, even with the European Union, at the level of the Commission and what was happening in the Parliament and the member states, where you saw France and Germany as an example. We say, wait a minute, over the last 20 years, we haven't created a single, digital technology giant. We haven't been able to really push the boundaries on this. Are we going to go down the same road where we're not going to be competitive in AI yet again, right, on this? So that is like some of the dynamics that we have witnessed there.
It's refreshing to see that, actually, because it's...
Yeah, I think it's positive for you.
I think, I admire what Europe has done to create a European Union to try to avoid wars in the future. That's a very good thing. But it's building up a competency about controlling markets, not about innovation. And it's a real challenge. I mean, if you look at the per capita GDP in Europe, especially France and Germany, it's been pretty static over the last 20 years.
Well, look at, when the euro got established, sort of roughly speaking, the sizes of the economy with the United States were roughly similar. Yeah. We have seen now, fast forward to today, roughly a quarter, 25% difference around that. Yeah. And that is not because there's no talent there and there's no market and so on. So actually, it is incredibly important that on some of these vectors that are the drivers of growth, which is technology and AI and so on, that there is a different sort of dynamic on the level of investment, aggregation of investment, risk, and that this vision of our competitive advantage is to be the regulators of the world, it's an incomplete vision. I'm not saying it's not an element that is appropriate and necessary, but that on its own as the basis of competitive advantage is incomplete.
Yeah, we need Europe to pick up speed on innovation because it'll be important for us. The competitive pressure will be good, but we need them as a partner in this world. So
no doubt.
Let me, if I could, Sudip, ask you, about 40 years ago, Ronald Reagan was president, and there was a crisis about scientists and security back then, and President Reagan promulgated something called NSDD 183. And it's really important. If you'll indulge me, I'm just going to read it. Because this is still the policy of the land, really, and it is the policy of this administration that, to the maximum extent possible, the products of fundamental research remain unrestricted. Keep basic science open is the agenda. Now, it's still in effect. I mean, but we've got a paranoia now about China, and we've got scientists that are collaborating on China. Do we have a framework here that would allow us to strike a balance to keep science open and then to address these security concerns? You mentioned the China project.
Yeah. First, let me just say that that language you're reading, to look back and say that was written almost 40 years ago, and how wise it really was. It is the source of so much creativity and innovation in this country, allowing not just a certain number of licensees to do something, but rather everybody to do things. It creates projects around the country that have changed the world. Do we have a framework today for the challenges that we face? When that was written, there wasn't a peer country in the sciences. And I look at even our S&T agreement with China that was signed the first time in 1979. There wasn't reciprocity built into that because there was no need for reciprocity. It was David and Goliath. We are now in a world where we have peer nations and blocks. And that does require a slight reframing, very slight. And in my mind, what it means is that we have to be able to frame the idea that there are downstream things happening from discovery that do have to be protected. And so I wouldn't change that definition at all. I actually think that's wonderful language that I wouldn't change at all. There is a need to say, in a framing that says, if we're going to have, in this block of that technology, reciprocity. I'll give you an example with genomic data. The U.S. puts our genomic data from our precision medicine work online for scientists to use all around the world. The Chinese do not. We have ecological data in this country from a project called NEON at the NSF that collects ecological data all around this country. The Chinese have a very similar project. Our data is open, theirs is not. The biggest user of our data is China. We need to have reciprocity. And so having a framework where we say, yes, for the fundamental research, we still want it to be open. Because frankly, if Alzheimer's is cured in Beijing or Boston, I'm still going to use that cure. I want it to be in Boston because I want the economic outputs, I want the vitality that comes from that, but I'm going to use it in either place. And so do I want the great scientists in China and Europe and Africa and elsewhere to be in on trying to cure Alzheimer's? Absolutely. I don't want that to stop. Do I want it to be that the downstream effects of that could be used for a bioweapon or it could be used for something else? Do I want that to be covered as open? No, I don't. And so we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Yeah. And that requires a little bit more nuance. But frankly, we're up to it. If 40 years ago they were up to writing that statement, we're up to writing the next statement.
Absolutely. Countless. I'd love to spend another hour on just that topic, but let me just ask, because our time. One of the things that the federal government does in R&D is it buys the tools that the private sector scientists get to use. I mean, when it was actually the Department of Energy that first mapped the human genome. That was Pete Domenici trying to keep one of his weapon labs busy.
It was an earmark.
It was an earmark. Yeah. It was a government earmark. But it was the same thing with GPS, same thing with so many things. I think the Department of Energy has got all of these massive machines that they have at the various labs, and they make it open. So what should the government be investing in for tools now?
Well, I'll tell you one dimension of it is what's happening in computation. We got to really get our act together on that. Let me give you an initiative. One of the issues that we have in our country with AI is that the private sector is so ahead in AI that even some of our very best universities cannot even replicate the results that are being generated in AI in the private sector. And that is not because of lack of knowledge or expertise. Is because of lack of access to the right form of computation and right access to data sets to enable that work to happen. So what can the federal government do? There is an initiative and a bill that is going to Congress called NAIR, the National AI Research Resource. And NAIR was an effort to actually build the infrastructure that would support AI computation for universities and the federal laboratories, and to enable them to stay at the forefront of AI. And you would say, well, don't we have supercomputers? It's like, actually, the details here matter. No, those supercomputers were built for running many legacy codes that are entirely appropriate for the science mission around machines, that, but they're not appropriate for running modern-day AI. Ditto, you could say, about quantum computing. There's going to have to be significant infrastructures to build quantum-centric supercomputing that makes this happen. So if you look just in the field of computation, there are very significant investments that are going to be required for both AI now and for quantum in the future that we're not right now on a path to deliver. And it's urgent because you go in this field in AI that is moving so quickly, when is the United States going to have state-of-the-art AI compute to support the university ecosystem? And you talk to deans at the School of Engineering, I talk to all of them around that. This is a massive issue.
It is. The other part of that is, in addition to investing in that infrastructure, it requires a slight change of culture to say there has to be more collaboration between academia and industry. We've got to be able to break some of those walls because in some cases, it doesn't make sense to replicate infrastructure that's already been built in industry and vice versa. And so we've got to be able to have a culture where it's okay for an academic to reach out across the divide and say, yeah, I want to collaborate with industry, and government should help catalyze that collaboration, maybe with dollars to do that, as opposed to rebuilding.
Tax incentives for allowing
right.
that, something
exactly. All those kinds of things.
And also, there's a methodology. For example, in AI, one of the reasons why an open innovation ecosystem is so important is because that is the basis of collaboration. Where you can have base models that now you don't have to retrain, and you don't have to have everybody has to have their own compute to actually be able to benefit and add something to the table. So actually it's the mechanisms of collaboration, the nature of infrastructure, and then how we work with one another, both bilaterally, but also as a community. And that's why in AI, open innovation is going to be so crucial to actually allow many, many stakeholders and participants to participate in this journey of co-creation. By the way, it's how we will make it safer and how we will properly govern it. Because more eyes looking at something and more eyes bringing their different perspectives into something historically has been the proven method of how to make technology safer and better reflect the diverse needs that you have across sectors.
It's also going to make us more competitive because that kind of network, that kind of collaboration can really only happen in an open society. It doesn't happen in an authoritarian place. It doesn't happen in a place where it's from the top down. And so that kind of collaboratory model that creates the opportunity for someone who grew up in Louisiana or grew up in the Central Valley of California to change the world doesn't happen elsewhere around the world where these kinds of investments are being made. It's a differentiator for us.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Louisiana. We need to find ways to get innovation around the country more broadly based. You know, this report you directed me to said it was pretty concentrated in the coasts, and really, we need innovation everywhere in America if we're going to bring prosperity across the country, I think.
But let me give you another initiative of what could the federal government do around that. In the legislation, right, over the last few years in CHIPS and Science, one of the things that was authorized in the legislation within the National Science Foundation was the creation of the first new directorate in the National Science Foundation in 30 years, called TIP, Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. The flagship initiative within that new directorate is something called the Regional Innovation Engines, which is designed precisely for that goal. How do we actually make investments in regions across the United States that historically have not been the beneficiary of science and engineering investments from the federal government? And focus on what is the unique aspect of their ecosystem, right, of their local needs, of the local institutions that are there, and their talent, that with federal investment could be a catalyst to get many others to work with each other and co-invest along with the federal government to actually revitalize or participate in the science and engineering enterprise moving forward. So the first set of 10 awards were put forth. It was like essentially the first pilot program, but that is entirely dependent on Congress appropriating what was authorized in the CHIPS and Science Act. And what we have unfortunately seen in this current budget around that is not only has, for example, in this context, NSF and the TIP Directorate to do this regional innovation not gone up, we've gone backwards. So unless in the next cycle we actually address this, that's an example of a program that would create more regional diversity and investments. But if the money doesn't get appropriated, then we don't get to execute and create opportunity everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, when I look at the history going forward from World War II to today, and I see projects that the U.S. government started and followed through on from across administrations, across decades, and made them happen. These are that kind of work. These are cathedral building. It requires planning for years and decades in advance. It doesn't mean that it's going to be top down. What it means is that we have to have sustained effort. And when we see this kind of very frustrating budget outcome where we had a blip for 1 year and then we've gone below those numbers already, we're sacrificing our own competitiveness unilaterally. We're not even in the race. So we've got to make sure that we are putting that heat and that pressure on our elected officials to ensure that we maintain the scientific investment required for economic vitality and national security.
By the way, just as a sign of levity here, since you say cathedral building, I remember visiting one of the leaders of, in this context was in Europe, the European Fusion Project. And they had that analogy, is like, we are building modern day cathedrals. And it just reminded me around that. And,
it'll take about that long, too.
And the point was, like, it takes generations of people to be able to do that. But sometimes, you know, I was kind of inspired, sort of like, you know, by that comparison and what it really takes sometimes, right, to do really transformative things. But it also speaks, I mean, without going to that extreme example, is the consistency of science and technology policy. This ecosystem does not thrive in sea soil, right? You have to have this consistency. Because why? Because if you look at it in academia as an example, you're hiring a grad student. You're putting them there. They have a 5-year to do a PhD. It doesn't like, well, 2 years you have funding, now you don't have funding, now you do the thing. It's just like, it messes the whole system. So consistency is incredibly important to achieve good outcomes.
Yeah. This is, my goodness, I think we could spend another 3 hours with just the ideas you've opened up, but we are at the hour. You know, Dario, you've generously offered to kind of lead a series of us looking into the future on technology. Just give us a thought about where you think we should be looking going forward.
Look, I'll start with a brief reflection that the moment we're witnessing is that we're seeing the elevation of technology to the same level of importance that we would have associated with like trade or military alliances as an example. And that the characteristic, though, is that if one wanted to have a free trade agreement, as an example, with a different country, you could dispatch leaders within the government and negotiate a free trade agreement. You could put it through Congress and get it happen. Same thing with, in the context of a military alliance. You want to launch AUKUS, you can do that, dispatch folks, and make it happen. But in technology, now that has been elevated as a co-equal to those areas, how are we going to make decisions? We have the challenge that the expertise and actually the capability does not reside entirely in the federal government, and I'm being a little bit, sort of fictitious.
You're being generous.
The majority of that is outside. So then we have the challenge of how will we have a dialogue? How will we invent the modern day institutional setting where around the table we have government, private sector, and technology companies, universities, and the ecosystem participating in the dialogue of how will we evolve technology and how will we use it, carrots and sticks. We have talked before around that, like we have seen, for example, technology using sticks in the form of export controls, but also there are carrots in terms of who are natural allies where we could have shared supply chains in some of the most sensitive technology. Chips is an example, but quantum and other things. So what I think it's incredibly exciting, and I'm very thankful that CSIS has, agreed to be able to take on this role, is actually to foster a dialogue on what are some of those technologies that are defining at that level of importance that makes it to the top of the list, and what are the policy implications, broadly speaking, that we should be thinking about. And because hopefully through that dialogue, we can make more informed choices about how we'll use the domestic investment part, but also internationally the carrots and the sticks.
Well, this is going to be a wonderful opportunity. The road ahead is going to be great fun. I personally think it's crucial for our future. We're tearing ourselves apart as a country, and it's in part because we've got people who work in the digital world, and they've got the wind in their back. People who work in the physical world, the wind is in their face, and we are not reconciling this. We have to grow the economy, and I think the only way to do that is with innovation and technology. And you are the pioneers. Sudip, thank you for being a part of this today. It has just been great. What you're doing at the American Association for the Advancement of Science is fabulous. And think about reaching out to the cops, people like me.
You've planted a seed there. We're definitely going to.
It's a good idea, and I'm glad to help in any way. And Dario, I look forward to every session with you. And could I ask my audience here just to say thank you with your applause for these things? Thank you.